In the blink of an eye, a whole year had passed since Rogers frequented this place. He felt it was extremely familiar, like a second home. That woman was similar. She was like a gentle, sweet wife. And whenever Rogers was present, her emotions seemed to remain perfectly preserved like in the beginning. Today, Rogers stood before the threshold of the house. As he raised his hand to knock on the door, it immediately opened on its own. It was still her, still with that calm demeanor like still water, with that strange feeling of familiar yet distant that hadn't changed one bit. It was precisely her personality that made Rogers become infatuated. The handsome, flamboyant playboy Rogers had never been swayed by a woman like this before. The girl looked at him and said, "Please come in." Rogers nodded, and as usual, he had a bouquet. Today it was chrysanthemums. The girl nimbly took it and placed it in the vase as always. While the girl was distracted, Rogers took out his daily journal where he recorded all his activities like a habit. For over a year, everything he had interacted with, the girl's manners and their conversations and topics, had all been clearly documented. Aside from discovering that he had fallen for the girl, he had also realized that in the abstract painting, there were actually hundreds of scenes layered atop each other. Each individual scene required extremely profound eyes and interpretation to make out, and each of those scenes seemed to depict a story, with connecting scenes forming a coherent narrative. Over the past year, Rogers had grasped the profound meaning within a good third of the painting, and with more time, as his artistic appreciation grew, the veils would be lifted faster. Rogers stepped inside the house, feeling the very tranquil atmosphere and her scent. It was a strange, extremely subtle fragrance like the smell of oil paints. Rogers was extremely fond of this scent on her body and had asked about it many times, but as usual, she would just smile without answering. A profound mystery in her personality. Just what secrets was she hiding? A one-year investigation was extremely vague for a talented detective who could crack cases in a flash like Rogers. A whole year had passed, and the case of the 3 deaths was still at an impasse. And it seemed Rogers himself had forgotten that he was supposed to be solving the case, not courting this woman. But perhaps the large amount of time spent with her had made Rogers forget, turning his secondary goal into his primary one. Today he had even prepared sweet nothings, ready to confess his feelings to her. Looking at the girl carrying the elegant dishes of food, Rogers slowly approached her without a sound, then gently stroked her hair, as if petting a cat. The girl suddenly turned to look at Rogers, her smile disappearing, followed by her eyebrows furrowing in confusion. "What are you doing?" Rogers was a little flustered, but his passions had taken over. He spoke in a very emotional manner. "Has anyone ever told you about the story of the student falling for his teacher?" The girl tilted her head, saying, "I don't think so. And if there was, that student would probably be expelled for such rudeness." Roger's eyes widened in amusement. He really hadn't expected her to interpret it like that. He laughed wryly. "Then what if I said, most of those stories end with the beautiful love between the two?" The girl sat down, smiling at Rogers, and said, "Then in summary, it's just that they were led astray by their affections to the point of losing propriety, and usually when people break the rules, there will always be some kind of price they must pay." Hearing this, Rogers immediately grasped the deeper meaning behind her words. Basically, she wanted to say that if Rogers had such thoughts about her, it would be best to get rid of them before reaping the consequences. But how could Rogers give up so easily? Calling a flamboyant man like him giving up on romance, when there were dozens of other girls pursuing him. Yet for her sake he had given up everything. How could Rogers be satisfied with an outcome not to his wishes? He said, "What if that student persists regardless of it all? Love can sometimes be far more blind than what is called reason advising us." The girl slowly pondered, then suddenly brought up another issue. She asked, "Do you still remember the 3rd scene in the painting?" Rogers nodded. "I remember, but why?" The girl said, "That was also a fox sitting on the porch of a burrow, the lair of the king of the jungle. But then when it realized the king had feelings for it, what about in the 4th scene?" Rogers was a little stunned considering this issue. He suddenly recalled that the 3rd depicted scene in the painting was of a fox sitting outside a tiger's den. But then in the 4th scene, the fox had died. All that remained were its bones under the feet of a tiger. There was still one thing he couldn't understand. So he asked the girl, "The fox died, but that doesn't conclusively prove the tiger did it. In the fourth scene, didn't the tiger also shed tears before the fox's skeleton?" The girl sighed, explaining, "In love, people sometimes become blind, blindly disregarding the fate laid out for them. And when they recklessly pursue those feelings, irony comes to them. When the tiger realized it also had feelings for the fox, it had already killed the fox. Because it was angry seeing the fox appear daily outside its den, but then one day after killing the fox, it missed the fox's silhouette. That was also the punishment for one who disbelieves in fate and blindly dedicates themselves to foolish affections." Rogers fell silent. Perhaps it was best to stop this topic here, since her answer had been very clear. Rogers sat back down, forcing a smile at her, and said, "It seems we've returned to the early scenes in the painting now. Perhaps we should also explore the next scenes. The matter of the fox and tiger was something we discussed many times over this past year." The girl smiled again. She said, "That's right, although the story of the fox and tiger were just side tales. But they formed the foundation to build up such a great masterpiece. Maybe I never told you. To fully grasp the painting, you need to thoroughly understand the fox and tiger story. It's a master key of sorts." The girl tilted her head again, stood up, and led Rogers over to the painting. She pointed at it and urged Rogers, "Now, try looking to see what the next scene in this painting is. It would be very helpful if you knew how to apply our previous discussion." Hearing this, Rogers immediately looked up at the painting. He tilted his head in surprise, because now he could clearly see that in the fox's skeleton there was a pair of eyes. Changing the situation a little, starting from the eyes and following the overall perspective, he could also see a tiger calmly and peacefully lying in the belly of an elephant. The girl asked again, "Well, what do you see now?" Rogers stammered in reply, "Strange. Why do I see an elephant? An extremely enormous elephant. And a little more. There's also a tiger with very long fangs." The girl answered, "That elephant is a mammoth, and the tiger is a saber-toothed tiger from ancient times. The saber-toothed tiger in this scene is like the fox in the third and fourth scenes." Rogers nodded in understanding. It turned out events were often tied together by profound causality. It was very likely the fox had been the mammoth in a previous life, and its next life was to repay its debt to the tiger. The more he thought about it, the more he felt this painting was profoundly deep. Thinking back on everything from before, Rogers felt there were far too many intricately interwoven things. Not just in the painting itself, but also from the girl. It seemed their conversations up till now, whether he wanted them to or not, had become topics related to the painting. And it seemed no matter how he tried to initiate a topic, he could make that debate become the key to unveiling the next veil. Could it be like she said, that this was truly predestined? Another year passed, and Rogers still had deep feelings for her. His personality had completely changed, from a cold-hearted person, disinterested in any beautiful girl. He was now infatuated with her and had gradually become a weakly lovesick man to the point of madness. What could be more agonising than seeing the person you like every day, yet being unable to confess? As for her, she was no different from the early days when Rogers had met her, still an indescribably cold yet alluring girl. And after 2 years had passed, that aura of mystery had not diminished one bit. She truly had an unbelievably profound mind. Rogers folded up his diary in which he had recorded everything he had experienced these past 2 years, and left it on the table for now. He was fully prepared for everything to continue going to that antique mansion. Today was a more momentous day than any other, because today the final veil would be lifted, the final scene in the painting. It was time for everything to be brought to light, including the deaths of the 3 people beforehand. What exactly was the utter terror that had led to their deaths? Yet that was not Roger's greatest concern. What concerned him most was that today he would confess his love to her. No matter where her spears were aimed, nothing could hold him back now. Today would be the final chance. After tomorrow, when the painting was fully interpreted, it would also be the time he no longer had any reason at all to see her. Placing the diary on the table, along with a letter containing a few lines, Rogers considered the possibility that he might also meet the same ending as the 3 people before. So he left behind this final clue for the next person. In case he unfortunately read it, he could also perhaps find the answer. Arriving at the door of the mansion, the wooden door opened again. This time Rogers had brought a bouquet of roses just like the first day, but with 99 blooms. The girl accepted the bouquet from Rogers' hands, looking at it then frowning. She said, "If something still stubbornly goes against fate, I dare not guarantee your safety." Rogers tilted his head, saying, "Safety? I have none of that left. Facing the lethal beauty of your eyes, the fragile shield of mine has completely collapsed." Rogers carefully spoke each word with great passion. The girl's cheeks suddenly flushed red. She lowered her head, not saying anything. Rogers gently lifted her chin and softly planted a sweet kiss on her lips. Then he said, "If a student has fallen for the teacher, can the teacher prevent it?" The blushing girl shyly shook her head. "Cannot prevent?" Rogers enthusiastically asked again. "Then should the teacher reciprocate those feelings?" The girl was silent, her eyes shining like the autumn waters. The two of them gazed at each other solemnly for a very long time. Much later, she finally sighed 3 words. "Come inside." Then she turned and took the flower to put in the familiar vase. At this time, the expression on her face was extremely complex, with mixed emotions churning within her. She silently shed tears without Rogers realizing. After another minute passed, Rogers quietly went to observe the painting, and this time without the girl needing to prompt him, he immediately applied all the details of this fateful meeting, looking into the painting to analyze it. He slowly examined the final painting, the 100th scene in the painting. A new person had completely appeared in this painting, not the animals like usual. It was a person, more precisely a painter, who was painting other paintings atop the overall backdrop of this large painting. Layer after layer of oil paint stacking atop each other made it extremely grandiose and vague. Rogers suddenly noticed one point, that when the painter was adding the final strokes, his face showed utter shock and alarm. Rogers looked deeper into the painting he was creating, and saw the painter was depicting himself collapsing before another painting, also painted by him. The layered events made it extremely difficult to understand, yet also very intriguing. But then Rogers re-examined every event in the painting, and his own expression also shifted to no less shock than the painter. He realized that the painter was none other than John Smith, the one who had painted this incredible work. In Rogers' eyes at this very moment in the 100th scene, John Smith seemed to be actually living it. He screamed incessantly with extreme anguish. And from scene 101 onward, everything became vividly lifelike. Each death, each victim perishing from their crazed shrieking. Like an extremely long reel of film nested within the painting Smith was creating within the painting. And there was another point. In each painting, when the person was about to die, there was also a woman standing beside them. Sweat began streaming down Rogers' shirt as he watched scene 104, where another completely different man was also terrified before the painting. And that man seemed to also be standing right where Rogers was, screaming horrifically until death. The same girl had appeared beside him too. Finally, when Rogers could recognize that the girl constantly appearing in the paintings was who, scene 105 was also visible to him. And the person standing there was none other than himself, Rogers. When he discovered that horrifying truth, it was also when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It belonged to the girl he loved to the point of madness, also the girl who was always present in the painting. As soon as she placed her hand on Rogers' shoulder, blood also streamed from his eyes. He had suffered a hemorrhagic stroke from the terror and died. Rogers' icy corpse had eyes wide open in fearful disbelief. Just like those before him, he had also died in the same way they did. In total, 4 lives had passed, and now counting him it was 5. In that painting, there was also a 4th man who died. But why was he unknown? Perhaps he was the 4th owner of this painting. After Rogers died, his body was quickly found thanks to the diary left on his table. The news that Rogers had bizarrely died in front of the painting, just like in the cases from 4 years ago, raised much suspicion. People also discovered another man's corpse next to Rogers. But the thing was, that man's body had turned to bones. This showed that 2 years ago he had also died in a similar fashion identical to Rogers. He could have been the art thief who stole the painting at that auction. It seemed the deaths in front of this painting consistently occurred at a spacing of 2 years, taking 1 life of its owner. A new investigator was assigned to look into the mystery of this painting. His name was Michael Roberts, also a top-notch detective. Roberts was Rogers' subordinate, and he was also the one who had discovered the secret diary describing the time period of conversations between Rogers and that woman. It also revealed to some degree the reason why Rogers had died. Was it because he confessed his feelings to that woman? No. Roberts believed it was because Rogers had unraveled the painting's terrifying secret, and he had died precisely in the same way as his predecessors. Roberts worried and hesitated, but the answer to that horrifying secret urged him even more. Since Rogers died, the painting had been sealed off and hidden in an isolated location, not letting anyone know. Only Roberts, the person in charge of this, could meet with the painting and investigate the secrets hidden within it. The painting was hidden deep inside a top-secret vault at the city's police headquarters, and only Roberts had the sole key to access it for examination. Previously, Roberts had spent quite a long time researching art appreciation. When Rogers had just died and Roberts took over this case, he could easily make out 20 of the scenes among the painting's over 100 depicted scenes. In Roberts' life, this was truly the first time he could see such a monumental painting, a massive, profoundly abstract work of perfect beauty. When first seeing the painting, Roberts was elated to the point of losing appetite and sleep. But then he still realized one truth. The woman in Rogers' diary had indeed appeared. The first night when he was working with the painting, she had also shown up right behind him in the uniform of a policewoman, causing him not to doubt her at all. But right after, through investigation, he found that no such policewoman had been assigned to coordinate with him. This could only be explained one way. It was that woman shape-shifting. Yes, it was the woman who had caused Rogers to die bizarrely, and she was unaware that before Rogers died, he had left a diary for Roberts, and in that very diary, Rogers had reported everything about her, with no mistake in her looks and figure. Roberts had guessed everything but still pretended not to understand what was happening. He kept pretending that he truly believed she was a person sent from headquarters to coordinate the investigation. Roberts didn't let even the slightest flaw be revealed. The woman looked completely normal. But unlike Rogers, he was not blinded by love until losing his reason. It could only be because Rogers had loved her too much, that he couldn't realize this woman had something bewitching about her, not as agile as a normal person. One day Roberts flipped back to the first diary page and discovered a very important detail in the initial conversation between Rogers and her. And this detail was not mentioned again by Rogers in the later journey. That detail stated that this woman only wanted to meet Rogers at night. So what about the daytime? Roberts asked himself that question. Until now he still played the fool, acting art blind in front of her. He said he could only see a few paintings under her guidance. But the truth was that Roberts could already see up to the 99th scene. Just a little more. If Roberts made the effort, he could completely make out scene 100 in this painting depicting what things. But Roberts didn't do that. He was extremely cautious with all his actions. If this woman couldn't appear in daylight, then all he needed to do was silently wait until daytime and meticulously examine it outside under the sun. Then he could understand everything clearly. Certain of his deduction, the very next day, Roberts acted according to his calculated plan. And this time his calculations were perfectly accurate. She did not appear at all under the sunlight. Just like in that painting, scene 100 was also swiftly grasped by Roberts. When discovering everything, he was shocked nonetheless. Luckily for him, he had chosen the right time to examine it. Otherwise, he might have met a similar outcome as those before. After seeing the final scene, Roberts also discovered he was the one standing there, only he didn't drop dead now. Looking again one more time, Roberts could vaguely make out a line of text warning him. "If you see this and don't die like us, please flip the painting over and look on the back." Indeed, that was what the text conveyed in meaning. Roberts didn't hesitate any longer and immediately did so, flipping the painting over and removing it from the frame. Another line of black text appeared. This text was left by the painter, in John Smith's handwriting. It said, "It's a painting demon. If I die, please meet the monk Iron Heart." That line ended, leaving a huge question for Roberts. What was a painting demon? And who exactly was this Iron Heart to know the full story? And where could that person be found? First, Roberts set aside that thought for now and immediately returned to his office. He searched the name Ironheart Monk to look him up. Luckily for Roberts, the man was extremely famous in Buddhist circles and could be easily found. The monk Ironheart was located at the United Temples, also right in the inner city and very easy to find. That very day, Roberts immediately made plans to go find him. When he arrived, he saw the monk sweeping the temple. He even brought the painting itself there for the monk to see. At first, the monk pretended to be senile when meeting Roberts, refusing to see him. But as soon as Roberts held up the painting, the monk was immediately shocked beyond belief. Then he pulled Roberts into the temple and interrogated him in detail. "Where did you find this painting?" Roberts said, "It's a very long story. I just need to know one thing. What relationship does the monk have with the artist John Smith?" The monk shook his head with a sigh. What relationship? If there was one, it would be the karma between teacher and student. Years ago, when he returned from studying art abroad, during a visit to the temple, he really liked how I conveyed messages into ancient paintings and immediately took me as his master. Roberts asked again. Then what he said in here, mentioning the painting demon. What is a painting demon? The ashen-faced monk answered, "It's a demon formed from ancient brush strokes, those forbidden strokes. It didn't listen to me and kept dreaming. It's rumored that Tran Dynasty artists could paint a picture leading to the immortal realm. Those who later learned those strokes would all paint out demons. And they all died bizarre deaths." The monk paused for a moment, then asked again, "You didn't see the final detail, did you?" Roberts said, "I've seen the whole thing, including how the demon kills people." The ashen-faced monk said, "Then I can no longer save you. Those who see the final paintings, half of their soul has already been drawn into the painting. So it can't be burned either, because burning it also means killing you. No one can live with only half a soul." After speaking, the monk immediately dismissed Roberts. Roberts didn't listen, also not believing it to be true. That very night, he brought the painting back to his hometown, looking for a reputable local exorcist, although he had never believed such superstitions before since he was a cop. But this time the events were too supernatural, forcing him to reluctantly use folk methods to make sense of it all. Roberts looked for people in this profession, and for the most part they didn't know. Only the last person he met actually understood it very well, but also advised Roberts the same as the monk, telling him to prepare well for the afterlife and that his time left was not much. Roberts still didn't believe this, but wanted to test arranging his own funeral as a precaution just in case. He wrote a suicide note to prepare for any unexpected circumstances. After that, he went looking for Mr. Johnson, asking him to keep it and instructing that if anything fatal happened to Roberts that night, he must immediately follow the will in the letter. Then Roberts silently sat there, sitting in the empty cemetery night, silently waiting while shining his flashlight to look at the painting's scenery. The curtain gradually descended, bringing with it the terrifying screeches of owls calling out steadily. The next frightening thing also happened to Roberts. As soon as he turned to look at the painting, it was also when flickering figures started emerging from within. A beautiful girl stepped out from the painting, stunning Roberts. She walked up to Roberts, getting even closer, then turned her head back. Roberts' eyes bulged wide open in utter horror, blood already streaming from them. His hands involuntarily went up to his own eyes, then forcefully stabbed deep inside. His eyeballs burst out. Roberts' mouth overflowed with blood. His hands went to his neck, strangling himself to death. Right at that moment, Mr. Johnson saw him committing suicide and shouted, "Roberts, what are you doing?" Mr. Johnson was extremely horrified, rushing over, but Roberts had already died, without any more signs of life. In the painting, another small added brushstroke was completed. If anyone was knowledgeable about art, they could all see it. The painting was depicting a scene of a girl stepping out from inside, her head twisted backwards. All her facial features were also reversed. She reached out to gouge out the young man's eyes and strangle him. Mr. Johnson sighed, respectfully burying Roberts's body in a secluded spot. After reading his suicide letter, Mr. Johnson also understood most of the whole story.